In the dead silence of a snowstorm, a little girl stood alone, and a German shepherd limped out of the white. Blood stained his fur. His breaths came ragged, but when he saw her, he didn't hesitate. He stood guard. No one knew where he came from. No tag, no name, just a broken dog in a broken town. They should have turned him away. But the girl hadn't spoken in over a year. And that night, when the dog collapsed beside her, she reached out and smiled. What they didn't know was that this dog held the last secret of a murdered cop, that the people looking for him would burn down everything to bury it. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story about a child who learned to speak again because a dog refused to leave her side, and how that bond became the key to exposing corruption, healing a town, and saving more than one life. Stay until the end, because you won't believe what this dog was hiding under his collar. The road ahead was vanishing, swallowed by sheets of wind-blown snow. Each flake seemed to hiss against the windshield like time whispering warnings, but the man behind the wheel didn't flinch. His name was Owen, mid-40s, sunken eyes, the smell of diesel soaked into the threads of his flannel jacket. He gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright, because it was. Next to him, buckled into the passenger seat of the battered Ford SUV, sat a girl with too much silence stitched into her small frame. Aurora Bell, 6 years old, face pale against the scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck. Her hands were cupped under her thighs for warmth, eyes cast toward the blurry whiteness outside. She hadn't spoken since October, since the night her mother collapsed in their kitchen without a sound, her lips turning blue before Aurora could cry out. The paramedics came, but they were too late. Just like her voice. Owen didn't know how to speak to her either. He was a logistics man, not a parent. The company said he could take a few days to settle family matters after Aurora's grandfather died. But the storm came fast, and the only way back was to drive supplies to the ranger station before Highway 23 iced over completely. A blizzard was forecast to cut across 3 counties. Warnings lit up the dashboard radio, but Owen had turned the volume low. He didn't want to disturb Aurora or himself. He hated the way silence echoed more than noise. She hadn't moved for over an hour, not since they passed the last gas station, its flickering neon half buried in drifts. He glanced at her now and then, catching slivers of her profile-wide eyes, lashes thick with frost, lips slightly parted like she might be breathing through a dream. The SUV's tires crunched over ice with each bend. His knuckles whitened on the wheel. "You okay, kid?" he asked, voice low. No answer. Not even a blink. A few seconds passed, then minutes. Just the hiss of heater fans, the slap of wiper blades struggling to keep up. The world was snow and more snow, and even the trees by the roadside looked half erased. He rubbed at his eyes and focused harder on the lines of tire tracks ahead. A delivery before midnight. That's all it was. Drop off the generators, canned food, and propane tanks. Then he'd find a motel where the walls were thin, the coffee bitter, and the silence not quite so suffocating. The heater sputtered. Owen smacked the vent. Come on, not tonight. Outside, the wind keened louder, more voice than weather now. Aurora turned her head slightly, as if she heard something in that moan the grown man couldn't. Her eyes didn't look at Owen. They stared past him, through the frost-bitten window. He noticed, but said nothing. She blinked slowly, and for the first time her breath fogged the glass with intent. She pressed a mittened hand to the window pane. And then Like the softest crack of spring thaw in the depths of a frozen lake, she moved her lips. "Did you say something?" Owen asked, startled. But she didn't answer. Instead, she pointed. Her finger trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, something that didn't make sense to Owen at first. There was a break in the tree line, a shadow far off the road. At first glance, it could have been a pile of snow or a broken stump, but the shape was wrong. Too dark, too still, and just barely moving. A twitch or a sway. Owen slowed the car instinctively. Aurora leaned forward now, both palms on the glass. Her breath hitched, fog rising faster. Her lips moved again, this time Owen heard it barely. "Stop!" He slammed the brake without thinking. The car skidded slightly, fish-tailed, then settled with a jolt. He turned to her, heart pounding, not just from the road. "You just talked," he whispered. Aurora didn't meet his eyes. She was already unbuckling her seatbelt, the urgency uncharacteristic for a child so silent. Owen stared at her for a beat longer, then followed her gaze. The shadow was clearer now, tangled in low branches near the base of a tree. A flicker of movement. Was that fur? "Stay here," he said sharply, but she was already fumbling for the door. "Aurora!" "No!" He cursed and threw the car into park, reaching for his coat. The cold slapped him in the face the moment he opened the door. 1,000 needles in a wind that didn't care who it cut. By the time he caught up, Aurora was halfway down the embankment, snow swallowing her boots. And there it was. A dog, no, a German shepherd lying limp at the base of the pine tree. Thick rope? No. Thin wire, rusted and biting into its fur. The animal didn't bark. It didn't move much at all. Its chest rose faintly. "Oh, my God," Owen muttered, kneeling. Frost clung to its eyelashes. There was dried blood on one paw. Ice matted its coat. This wasn't a stray. It had tags, or what looked like remnants of them, and someone had left it here, tied it here. "Who does this?" he whispered. Aurora knelt beside the dog, slowly removing her mittens. Her hands trembled as she reached forward, fingers brushing the animal's ear. It stirred weakly, letting out the barest of whimpers. Owen hesitated for only a second before pulling out his multi-tool. "Hold him," he said. "Just gently." Aurora obeyed. The wire snapped after a few tries, and they managed to lift the limp body heavier than expected between them. Snow fell harder now, the SUV barely visible up the hill. They climbed, stumbling. The wind screamed around them like it wanted to erase the moment. But Aurora didn't let go, and neither did the dog. The SUV trembled as a gust of wind slammed against it, rattling the doors like invisible fists trying to break in. Owen leaned forward, squinting into the pale wash of snow beyond the windshield, one hand tightening on the wheel, the other adjusting the barely working defroster. The wipers scraped back and forth in a hopeless rhythm, clearing just enough to reveal the merciless white void ahead. They had passed the last road marker 10 minutes ago, or maybe 20. Time had started dissolving the moment the snow swallowed their tracks. Owen gritted his teeth, glancing at the fuel gauge. The needle was dipping, too fast. The heater couldn't keep up, and they were running blind. Beside him, Aurora hadn't moved, not since she pulled the dog into the back seat and wrapped it in the only blanket they had left. She sat beside the animal now, her hand on its head, her body curved toward it like a question mark folded in worry. Her small fingers traced the frozen edge of the dog's fur, brushing gently, as if trying to warm it by memory alone. He hadn't asked what she was thinking. He wouldn't have known how to if he tried. The snow thinned for a moment as they came around a bend. Then, tap. It was soft at first, a sound barely there. Owen thought it might be the heater sputtering again. Tap. He glanced in the rear-view mirror. Aurora's mitten tapped the window once more, eyes locked on something outside somewhere in the trees. "Kid?" he asked, not slowing yet. "What is it?" She didn't answer. Then, without turning, her lips moved. It was so faint, Owen wasn't sure if he heard it or just felt the shape of the word in the air between them. Stop. He hit the brakes. The SUV groaned, tires skidding slightly before catching on the slush. They jerked forward an inch, then stopped. Owen turned, staring at her. "What did you say?" Aurora blinked slowly. Her face was pale but clear. She pointed again, this time more insistently, toward a cluster of dark trees off the right side of the road. "There," she whispered. It was the first thing she'd said in weeks, maybe months. And now she was speaking to save a stranger. Owen didn't hesitate. He shifted the car into park and flung his door open. The cold was instantaneous, sharp, punishing. The kind that stole breath from your lungs before you could exhale. He climbed out, boots crunching into packed snow, and looked toward where she pointed. A shape barely visible sat low between two trees. At first it seemed like just another snowdrift, but then he saw it. The outline. The color. Not white, not rock. Dark. Slumped. Aurora opened her door before he could stop her. "Stay here," he shouted, but she was already out, her boots sinking deep into the side embankment as she staggered forward through the wind. "Damn it," Owen hissed, chasing after her. The two of them moved slowly, forced to lean into the wind that shoved at their backs. Aurora was ahead, legs small but determined. Her scarf flapped behind her, like a ribbon from another life, a ribbon her mother used to tie for her, before everything broke. And there it was, a dog, another one, tied to the base of a tree, its body curled inward like a question it couldn't answer. The rope around its neck had cut deep into the fur. Blood had frozen along the knot. Its muzzle twitched weakly, one paw lifted in what looked like pain or maybe surrender. Owen's stomach turned. Jesus! He dropped to his knees beside it, hands already pulling at the ice-crusted knot. The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl. It was past fighting. "Same wire," he muttered, noticing the rust-stained edges. "Same setup." Aurora knelt beside him, not waiting for permission. Without a word, she reached into her coat and took out the heat pack she'd hidden earlier, the one she was saving for herself. She cracked it, activated the warmth, and tucked it gently beneath the dog's body. The animal whimpered softly. Aurora whispered something Owen couldn't hear, and the dog responded, not with a bark, not with movement, but with its eyes. They opened just enough to meet hers, not pleading, not fearful, just connection, recognition, as if it remembered her from a place beyond pain. Owen finally got the rope loose. He leaned back, snow soaking into his jeans, breath clouding the space between him and the child beside him. "Same people who left the first one," he said grimly. "Has to be." Aurora didn't answer. She was busy unzipping her coat and wrapping it around the dog's upper torso. Her lips pressed tight. "You shouldn't be out here," Owen murmured, but his voice lacked scolding. She looked at him now, really looked, and said, clearly, "We can't leave him." Another sentence, the second in a storm. Owen nodded once, heavy with things unspoken. He reached down, carefully lifting the dog-sharper bones this time, lighter than he expected. Probably hadn't eaten in days. Aurora followed closely behind, hand on the dog's paw even as they moved. The snow whipped harder now, mocking their pace. But something in the air had shifted. The silence was no longer empty. It held purpose now. Echoes of a voice returning, of footsteps that didn't walk away, of small hands doing the work adults had forgotten how to do. Back at the SUV, Owen placed the new rescue gently on the floorboard beside the first. The two dogs didn't move at first. Then one reached its nose toward the other. A whimper, a lick, a silent recognition between survivors. Aurora smiled faintly. Then, for the first time in as long as Owen could remember, she laughed. Just a small sound, but it shattered the ice inside him like nothing else could. Owen stood motionless, one hand on the open car door, the other clenched into a fist at his side. Snow howled around him, slicing across his cheeks like cold razors. Behind him, the SUV groaned as the engine struggled to stay alive. Inside, the heat was dwindling, and so was time. Aurora sat in the back seat, her face pressed to the frosted window. She didn't blink, didn't speak again. But her hand was still lifted, still pointing toward the shadow beneath the trees. Owen followed her gaze. There, barely visible through the swirling veil of snow, was a shape hunched unnaturally against the base of a tree, a dark mass, slumped, lifeless. His gut twisted. He didn't want to know, but he opened the door the rest of the way. The cold swallowed him instantly, a feral kind of cold, primal and merciless. It crept under his coat and filled his lungs like smoke. He trudged forward, boots crunching over snowdrift and ice, each step heavier than the last. The forest loomed on either side of the road, gnarled trees bent low under the weight of winter, branches clawing at the sky like fingers begging for warmth. And then he saw it, clearly. A dog. A German shepherd, tied to the tree with a wire so thin and taut it disappeared into the fur around its neck. The dog was barely breathing, its ribs rising in shallow, jerky intervals, each breath a war it was losing. Frost had formed along its whiskers, clinging to its muzzle like lace. One of its ears twitched weakly, then fell still. Owen's jaw tightened. He moved faster now, stumbling through knee-high snow, not caring as branches scraped at his face. He dropped to his knees in front of the animal, his gloves fumbling with the frozen wire. It had bitten deep. Blood had dried around it, darker than snow, older than mercy. "God," he muttered. "Who does this?" The dog didn't growl, didn't flinch. It just looked at him, eyes sunken, amber dulled, but still watching. Behind him, he heard the crunch of smaller footsteps. Aurora. She was already out of the car, moving with that same strange purpose he'd seen before. Quiet, steady, too calm for a child in a storm. "Aurora, stay back!" Owen called, not looking. But she didn't stop. She crouched beside him, silent as a shadow, her wide eyes locked on the German shepherd. Her hands trembled inside her mittens, but she didn't flinch. "She's a girl," Aurora whispered. Owen looked at her, startled. "She?" Aurora nodded once, like she knew, like she felt it. And maybe she did. The girl hadn't spoken in weeks. Now her words fell with certainty. Owen turned back, working faster. The wire refused to budge. It had frozen in place. He yanked harder. The dog whimpered, low and hoarse. "Sorry, girl," he murmured. "Hang on." Aurora reached into her coat, pulled out her scarf. Not the new one Owen had bought in a gas station 2 towns ago, but the old one, the fraying pink one that had belonged to her mother, the one she hadn't let anyone touch. Without a word, she leaned forward and wrapped it gently around the dog's neck, just above the wound, as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." Then, carefully, she pressed her hand against the shepherd's side. The dog closed her eyes, and Owen found the strength to break the wire. The snap was quiet but final, like the sound of something being undone, something long overdue. He slipped his arms beneath the animal, lifting her slowly. She was heavier than she looked, yet somehow too light, malnourished, bone pressing through fur, heat leaking from her body like breath into the storm. Aurora didn't move as he stood. She walked beside him instead, silent, her mittens still resting lightly against the dog's paw, as if her touch alone could guide them all back through the storm. They reached the SUV. Owen opened the back door with his elbow, bending carefully as he laid the shepherd down across the seat. The other dog, the one they'd found earlier, shifted slightly to make room, as if recognizing something familiar. Not a stranger, a sister in survival. Aurora climbed in after them, pulled the blanket over both dogs, then leaned against their bodies, small arms draped like wings. Owen got behind the wheel again, fingers stiff, heart thudding. He looked at the child through the rearview mirror. "She needs a name," he said quietly, voice cracking with something he couldn't place. Aurora didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Ember." He turned slightly. "Why?" Aurora's eyes met his, calm and ancient. "Because she still burns," she whispered. And in that moment, Owen realized something far more terrifying than the storm outside. The silence wasn't just broken. It had transformed. Aurora was changing, and so was he. 2 broken souls, riding through a white void with 2 near-dead dogs and a name that sounded like hope. Ember. The tires groaned under the weight of snow-packed treads as the SUV lurched forward, headlights slicing through the white void like blades dulled by time. Inside, silence settled again, tense, but not empty. Aurora sat cradling Ember in the back seat, the girl's small hands gently brushing ice from the dog's fur. Next to them, the other shepherd, still unnamed, dozed in half-conscious exhaustion, curled around Ember like a reluctant guardian. Up front, Owen gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. His jaw was locked, not from the cold, but from the slow dread climbing his spine. The fuel light had just blinked on. He glanced at the gauge again. A shallow orange glow, the kind that didn't whisper but warned, "You're running out of time." "Damn it," he muttered, voice barely louder than the wind hammering the windshield. He tapped the dashboard like it might help. It didn't. The road beneath them had narrowed into a single icy track. Just one set of tire grooves carved by whoever had come before, now being swallowed back up by the storm. Potholes hid under the snow. Every few seconds, the chassis jolted violently, shaking the heater vents and causing the side mirrors to shiver. The trees had thinned to skeletal outlines. There were no signs of life, no cabins, no rangers, just the storm and the weight of choices. Owen reached for his phone. No bars. Of course. He hit the steering wheel once. A dry, restrained thump. the kind of frustration that came from being responsible for too much, too soon. From the back seat, a voice broke through. "We're slowing." It wasn't a question. It was Aurora watching him through the gap between the front seats, her voice as steady as the falling snow. Owen hesitated. "Fuel's low," he said finally. "And the roads are worse than I thought." Aurora didn't answer, just shifted her gaze toward Ember. The dog was barely breathing. Each rise and fall of her chest was like a fragile promise. "I'm still here." "We can't stop now," the girl whispered. Owen looked at her in the rearview mirror. Something in her eyes had hardened. Something older than 6 years old. It wasn't defiance. It was belief. "I know," he said. He pulled the glove box open, retrieving the wrinkled Ranger District map from earlier. It was damp and stained with coffee, but legible. His finger traced along a road marked in faded blue ink, Forest Service Route 23, bending east toward the foothills. A tiny triangle symbol blinked up at him from the map's edge. "Ranger Outpost," he muttered, "if it's still there." "How far?" Aurora asked. Owen calculated. 8 miles, maybe 9. Aurora said nothing, just curled tighter around Ember. The SUV thudded again, fishtailing slightly before regaining its grip. Owen cursed under his breath and pressed the gas. The engine responded, but not with confidence. It choked once, then again. A sickly metallic cough. "Come on, girl," he said to the car, patting the dashboard. "Not now." The heater sputtered. Cold crept in through the floor. Outside, the storm was building. The wind no longer whispered. It roared, barreling sideways across the road, hurling snow in blinding sheets. Visibility dropped to a few dozen feet. The line between ground and sky blurred until all that remained was white. Owen's hands began to tremble, not from cold, but from calculation. He had Aurora, 2 nearly frozen dogs, a dying vehicle, and no reception, no backup, no way to carry them all if things went south. He considered stopping, just for a moment. Let the storm pass. But then Ember let out a sound somewhere between a groan and a whine, and Aurora leaned closer, wrapping the scarf tighter around the dog's body. They wouldn't make it if they stopped. So he pressed forward. 10 minutes later, the engine sputtered again, this time louder. Then the dash lights flickered. The car began to slow. A subtle shudder ran through the chassis like the shiver of an animal sensing its own end. "No," Owen muttered. "Not yet. Come on." But the SUV had made its decision. The engine gave one last rattle and died. The headlights dimmed. The heater cut out. Silence fell like a curtain. Owen sat in the dark, his breath fogging up the windshield. Behind him, Aurora whispered, "What now?" Outside, the wind howled like it had been waiting for this moment all along. He turned to look at her. Her face was calm, but only just. Her eyes flicked between the 2 dogs. Ember was still alive, barely. The other was shivering harder now, pressing against her. "We walk," Owen said finally, his voice low but clear. "To where?" she asked. Owen reached over and cracked the door. The wind shoved back hard. He gritted his teeth. "To that ranger station. We don't have a choice." He paused. "Can you carry her?" Aurora nodded once. "I'll take the other," he said. And without another word they bundled up scarves, mittens, every last layer they had. Owen zipped Ember into his coat, felt her faint heartbeat against his ribs. Aurora did the same with the other shepherd, wrapping her in a blanket and securing her as best she could. Then they stepped out into the white silence, side by side, no turning back, only forward, onto thin ice. The wind had a voice now, not just noise, not merely sound, but a voice, and it howled like something ancient had been awakened in the white. It rushed across the desolate stretch of highway, sculpting snow into snarling ridges, curling around the SUV like fingers of frost, searching for weakness. Owen squinted through the windshield, knuckles pale on the steering wheel. He leaned forward, trying to distinguish road from ravine, but the world had turned blank, a white so thick it erased edges, erased direction. "Still nothing?" he asked. Aurora shook her head without looking up. Her fingers were curled protectively around Ember's fur in the back seat. The German shepherd lay stretched across a thermal blanket, eyes closed, breath shallow. The other dog rescued from the tree tucked beside her, trembling, unconscious, but alive. Owen's phone sat in the cup holder. Still no signal, just a spinning wheel, like it too was lost in the storm. He checked the gas again. Lower, much lower. "We're close," he muttered, as much to himself as to the girl. "A few more miles, Max. Then we walk the rest." But the storm had its own plans. A sudden gust sharper, stronger slammed into the SUV like a shove from an unseen giant. Snow whipped sideways. The wheels lost traction for just a second. Then everything changed. The back end of the vehicle fishtailed. Owen yanked the wheel in reflex, overcorrected. The tires caught on a hidden ridge of ice beneath the snow, just enough to send the SUV lurching sideways, as if skidding on glass. Aurora screamed. Owen's stomach dropped. The vehicle spun, nose first, then slid. Crunch. A hollow, snow-muffled impact. The front end plowed into a drift, buried like a coffin lid. The whole SUV shuddered. Ice exploded across the hood and windshield. For a moment, everything went still, except the hiss of the engine choking on itself and the slow hum of the heater dying out. Then silence. They had crashed. Owen's heart pounded like a warning drum in his chest. He twisted in his seat. "Aurora?" "I'm okay," came the whisper. She was curled over Ember, arms shielding the dog. Her hair was dusted in snow that had somehow crept in through the door seams. The other shepherd was motionless, body pressed close against Ember's side like she was holding on to the last warmth in the world. Owen exhaled slowly, bracing himself. He opened the driver's side door with effort. The snow resisted like thick wool. A gust of freezing wind slapped his face. He stepped out, boots crunching through a drift nearly to his knees. He surveyed the damage. The car was nose first into a snowbank, wheels half lifted off the road by the angle. No way out unless he dug. And even then, the engine had gone quiet. He kicked at the front tire. It didn't budge. Back inside, the air already felt colder. The heater had given up its ghost. He slid back into the cabin and shut the door. "We're stuck," he said, calmly, too calmly. Aurora didn't flinch. Her hand stayed on Ember's chest, counting breaths. "There's no signal either," he added. "We'll wait for the storm to break, then go on foot." Aurora nodded faintly. Her eyes, however, never left the shepherd. "She's getting colder," she whispered. "I know." He turned in his seat and reached behind for the emergency kit, extra gloves, chemical heat packs, one space blanket. Not enough. He cracked open one heat pack and slid it beneath Ember's body gently. Another went between the two dogs, where the shepherd's breathing was slowing. Then he handed Aurora his scarf. "Put it around her paws," he said. "Help circulation." She obeyed without a word. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but urgency. Outside, the storm screamed louder. Snow slapped the glass like fingers trying to get in. Owen sat in silence for a moment, staring out at the void. They were invisible now. No cars would see them. No help would find them by chance. This wasn't just cold. It was isolation. He looked back again. Aurora had curled her body around the dogs like a shield. Her eyes were wide open, but something in them was far away, searching, remembering. He recognized that look. It was grief, but suspended, like a breath held too long. And somehow he knew, if Ember didn't make it, that silence Aurora had just broken earlier would return for good. "She'll live," he said softly. "You found her. That means something." Aurora didn't reply, but she reached down and pressed her forehead gently to Ember's, a gesture too intimate for words. Time passed. Owen cracked the window an inch, watching the wind. Still no let-up. His hands were numb. He didn't know how much longer they could stay inside without freezing. He turned the key once more. Click. Nothing. He bit his lip. Then suddenly a sound from the back, a gasp. Owen spun around. Ember had stirred. Barely. A twitch in the ear, a faint rise of the chest, just a little stronger now. Aurora's face lit up. Not a smile, but something more sacred. Hope. "She moved," Aurora whispered. Owen nodded. "She's fighting." From outside came another howl, but not of the wind, a distant, long-pitched bark, somewhere to the south. Owen narrowed his eyes. Aurora sat up. "Another dog?" she asked. "I don't know," he replied. "But maybe it's not just us out here." He reached again for the map. Somewhere past this storm was the ranger's post, and now they had another reason to push forward. But first, they had to survive the white. Inside the marooned SUV, breath turned to fog. Frost crawled along the windows like fingers etching the final verse of a forgotten lullaby. Every minute they lingered, the cold pressed deeper into cloth, into skin, into bone. Aurora didn't speak, but she moved with quiet purpose. Her hands, though trembling, reached for the scarf around her neck, a long woolen strip, frayed at the ends, still clinging to her mother's scent. It was the only thing she had left that felt like warmth, like memory. She didn't hesitate. Gently she folded it and wrapped it around the neck of the unconscious dog, the one they'd found bound to a tree near Frozen, who hadn't yet stirred since the crash. The fabric barely made it halfway around, but she tied it carefully just under the chin so it wouldn't slip off. She adjusted it like a mother adjusting a child's coat. Then she whispered more to herself than to Owen, "His name's Ash." Owen looked up from the map he'd unfolded, surprised. "Ash?" She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the shepherd's faintly rising chest. That was the color of the sky. Before the storm came, it looked like smoke, like something had burned and the whole sky turned to ash. There was something almost reverent in her voice. Owen studied her a moment longer, then turned back to the window. Outside, the wind was finally starting to weaken, still biting, still cruel, but no longer deafening. Snow had drifted against the vehicle on all sides, nearly halfway up the doors. But there was a shift in the storm's rhythm, a softness trying to push through. And then he saw it. A flicker. Far off, through the curtain of white, a small glow. Faint. Orange. At first he thought it was a hallucination, a trick of frost-stung eyes, but it was steady and real. "Aurora," he said quietly. "Look." She followed his gaze. Through the iced-over window, a flickering light danced. It wasn't close. Maybe half a mile. Maybe more. But in this vast white void it was the first sign of life that hadn't come from a dog's breath or a child's whisper. Owen checked his watch. It was late afternoon, but the storm had hidden the sun for so long it could have been midnight. "We can't stay here," he murmured. "That fire, or whatever it is, that's our shot." He looked over his shoulder. Ember, the older dog, was breathing more evenly now. Her paw twitched every few minutes, as if chasing something from a past she hadn't yet escaped. But Ash? He remained still. The scarf was now damp from the condensation of his shallow breaths. Aurora met Owen's eyes. She didn't ask if it was safe. She didn't ask if they had another choice. She just said, "We'll carry them." It took 10 minutes to dig the doors open. The snow resisted like a jealous warden. Owen used the emergency shovel with numb fingers, cursing softly under his breath, every breath billowing out like smoke. The wind had slowed, but the air still sliced. They bundled Ember in the thermal blanket and carried her like a child between them. For Ash, Owen zipped him into his own coat, pressing the unconscious dog's body against his chest as tightly as possible, like a soldier shielding a fallen comrade. Aurora led the way. The snow swallowed their steps almost instantly, but she moved with surprising surety, guided by instinct, or maybe the glow. It flickered like a candle behind a curtain of mist. The world was soundless now. No tires, no birds, no branches. Just the crunch of boots, the rustle of blankets, and their own breath rising like ghosts into the white. Owen kept his eyes on the glow ahead. It would disappear, then reappear, like it was breathing. He spoke quietly, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. "Why Ash?" Aurora's voice came from beside him. "Because he was meant to die." Owen blinked. "But he didn't," she continued. "He was forgotten in the storm, left to freeze, but he didn't. That makes him like ash, what's left after everything burns." Owen was silent for a while. Then he nodded, the name taking root inside him. Ash. Not just a name, a survival, a symbol. They trudged across a clearing where the snow was shallower, wind-swept and flat. The trees framed them like black veins against the gray sky. And there it was, a cabin. Small, hunched under the weight of snow, with light flickering from a window half buried in frost. Smoke rose from a crooked chimney. A lantern burned at the door. Aurora pointed. "There." Owen didn't need convincing. They pushed on, the last 100 feet feeling like a mile. His legs were numb, arms heavy from the weight of Ash, whose breath now came in raspier gasps. He didn't know if anyone would be inside the cabin. He didn't care. At the door he kicked once, twice. Then it opened. The scent of pine smoke and warmth hit them like an old lullaby. They stumbled in, half collapsing, half carrying. Aurora knelt and laid Ember down near the fireplace. Owen unzipped his coat and gently lowered Ash onto the worn rug. The scarf had loosened. Aurora fixed it with both hands, tightening it just enough. And for the first time since the storm began, Ash opened his eyes. Only a sliver, but enough. enough to know his name had been heard. The wind returned with a vengeance. It howled not like weather, but like memory ripping through the trees, twisting through the valley, shrieking over the frozen field as if warning them they had trespassed where time itself had forgotten to pass. Owen leaned forward into it, muscles burning with each step as he carried the limp weight of ash bundled inside his coat. His arms were numb, his jaw clenched so tight he could feel his teeth throb. The snow reached his knees now, thick, heavy, dragging like regret. Aurora trudged beside him, eyes squinting through the blur of white, one mittened hand gripping the edge of his jacket so she wouldn't fall behind. She hadn't said a word since they left the abandoned road behind them. The wind was too loud. The cold was too loud. But inside her mind it was louder still. Because the storm, the blinding, screaming storm, was waking something. Flashes. First just sound, then shadow. Then her mother's voice. It came through the storm the way dreams push through sleep, soft, barely formed, but full of meaning. A lullaby. Her mother used to sing when it rained, when the thunder scared her, when Aurora was small enough to fit inside her coat, just like Ash was now inside Owen's. Snow will fall and wind will rise, but Mama's arms are still the skies. The words floated above the field of white, like threads of warmth unraveling from some lost part of her chest. She blinked hard. The tears burned as they froze on her lashes. The storm wanted to take her back to that night. Back to when her mother drove into the teeth of a blizzard and didn't come out the other side. But Aurora didn't look back. She looked at the dog, Ash. His head was limp, muzzle barely peeking out from Owen's coat, scarf still tied tight. She leaned close every few steps just to hear the faint breath, to make sure he was still here, still real. Owen grunted. There's a ridge up ahead. If we can get to it, we'll be able to see where that light came from. Aurora didn't answer. Her breath came in short puffs, arms locked at her sides, boots soaked through. Another flash in her mind, her mother's hand on her head. The car heater broken. Her mom laughing softly anyway, saying, "We make our own warmth, baby bird. That's what people do." And suddenly she said aloud, "Ash is like her." Owen paused, glancing sideways. "Your mom?" Aurora nodded. "She didn't let the storm take her. Not really. Not all of her." Owen didn't answer right away, but something tightened in his throat. Ahead of them, the field began to open, a stretch of open white where the trees had thinned, the wind more vicious, unobstructed. It looked endless, eternal. The kind of place where names disappeared. They stepped into it anyway. The wind screamed across the field like a choir of broken glass. Each gust stole breath, each step a war. Owen's arms felt like they were no longer part of him. He shifted Ash slightly, one hand cupping the shepherd's head against his chest, still breathing, barely, but breathing. Behind them, their footprints were already vanishing. Aurora's lips were blue, her scarf had frozen stiff, but her hand never let go of his jacket. And her eyes never left Ash's face. Then she said it again, louder this time, maybe to the wind, maybe to herself. "He's not supposed to be here." Owen frowned. "What?" "He was supposed to be gone. That's what they wanted when they left him out there, whoever did it. But he isn't." She looked up at the sky, no sun, just a pale, swirling ceiling of ash-gray snow. "I think the storm was trying to bury him, but it couldn't. It's like something in him said no." Her voice cracked, like it was the first thing she'd truly believed in weeks. Owen didn't know what to say, so he just kept walking. They reached the ridge. It wasn't high, but enough to look down upon a shallow basin, a small valley tucked between the hills, where the snow broke like waves over driftwood. And there, finally, clearly, now was the cabin, still small, still crooked. But the light inside was steady, golden, pulsing like a heartbeat, a home-shaped promise in the land of the forgotten. Aurora stared. A memory clawed its way forward, her mother reading by lantern light, tea steaming on the table, whispering, "You don't have to see the whole road, just the next light." Owen touched her shoulder. "We're close." She nodded, then looked at Ash again. "I think we were supposed to find him." Owen didn't argue. He only stepped forward down the slope through the snow. And Aurora followed. Wind screaming, storm howling, world frozen around them. But inside Owen's coat, the dog stirred ever so slightly. And for a single moment, even the storm held its breath. The snow crunched like breaking glass beneath Owen's boots as they approached the crooked silhouette of the cabin. It stood alone at the edge of the basin, leaning slightly as if exhausted by decades of holding its ground against storms. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, winding skyward like a ghost. The amber flicker of firelight pulsed from a narrow window, warm, alive, impossibly out of place in this world of frozen silence. Aurora leaned into Owen's side, shivering but alert. Her gaze was fixed not on the door but the shape beyond the frosted panes movement. Someone was inside. Owen didn't hesitate. He shifted Ash in his arms, still wrapped tightly in the coat, unmoving except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest, then trudged up the last few feet to the cabin's porch. He knocked twice, firm, deliberate. Nothing. Then a shadow moved past the window. Another knock. This time, louder. Behind him, Aurora's breath steamed in the air. Her eyes darted to the surrounding trees. The storm hadn't relented. It had only paused like a lung held mid-inhale. The door creaked open 2 inches. Then click. A rifle barrel met the gap. Owen froze. "I don't sell firewood, and I don't take in strays," a voice growled, aged, gravelly but alert. "One more knock, and I'll assume it's not for warmth." Owen held up one hand. "We've got a child," he said calmly, keeping his tone steady, "and a dog that won't make it another hour out here." The man inside didn't answer. But the door creaked open wider. Behind the gun stood a wiry figure in a heavy flannel coat, silver beard tangled over his collarbone, eyes sharp beneath bushy gray brows. He didn't lower the weapon, but he looked past Owen to the girl, and then to the bundled figure in his arms. Owen didn't flinch. "We just need shelter. One night." "Not many get this far up," the man muttered. "We didn't plan to," Owen replied. A long pause, then the man stepped back. "Inside, and make it quick." The warmth hit like a wave. Not just the heat of the wood-burning stove, but the sense of enclosed space. A roof that didn't leak snow. Walls that didn't groan. Aurora's legs almost gave out from the sudden shift. She stepped in slowly, her eyes wide as they scanned the room. Books lined the walls, maps, shelves packed with tools and half-assembled gadgets. The place looked like a hermit's haven, but not abandoned. Every object had a place. Every shadow had memory. Owen laid Ash gently on a thick quilt beside the stove. The dog didn't stir. His fur was stiff with frost, his breathing shallow. Aurora dropped to her knees beside him, immediately placing a hand on his side. "Still breathing?" she whispered. The man set the rifle aside but didn't take off his coat. "What happened?" he asked, voice still cold. Owen stood slowly. "Found him tied to a tree, wire around his neck, barely alive." The man grunted. "And you thought dragging a near-dead animal and a half-frozen girl through a blizzard was a better idea than leaving him?" "Leaving him wasn't an option," Owen said flatly. Their eyes locked. The silence pulsed. Finally, the man sighed and knelt beside the stove. He grabbed a tin kettle, filled it from a nearby jug, and set it atop the flames. "Name's Nolan Avery," he muttered. "Used to be a field medic. Retired up here 5 years ago. Thought I left the whole rescue business behind." Owen hesitated. "I'm Owen Langley. This is Aurora. She yours?" "No," Owen said, glancing at the girl. "She needed help." Nolan gave him a long look, as if that wasn't enough of an answer, but knew better than to pry. Then his eyes turned to the dog. "German Shepherd," he murmured, kneeling beside Ash. "Bigger than average, judging by that muscle mass. Probably ex-military." Aurora's eyes widened. "You can tell?" "I've seen enough of them, back when they used to medevac soldiers from the front with nothing but a handler and a dog." He reached forward, gently parting the fur near Ash's neck. "You said he was bound with wire?" Owen nodded. "He's lucky. No visible tearing. But this much cold for this long." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he rose, crossed to a cabinet, and returned with a tin of salve, a clean towel, and 2 blankets. "I'll help you warm him up," he said. "But if he doesn't respond in the next hour, it's going to be rough." Aurora didn't blink. "He will." Her voice didn't shake. They worked in silence. Ash's fur was cleaned, dried, and slowly warmed. Aurora never left his side, even when her fingers stung from thawing. Owen brewed tea. Nolan watched him closely, still skeptical, but no longer hostile. Outside, the wind picked up again. Inside, time slowed. Then, as Nolan gently ran a hand over Ash's ribs, the dog made a noise so soft it could have been missed. A low, pained whine. Barely a sound. But Aurora heard it. She looked at him and whispered, "See? I told you." Owen allowed himself a small exhale. Nolan grunted. "Stubborn dog." He looked at the pair man and girl, bruised and silent, yet fiercely alive, and added, quieter now, "Stubborn people, too." The storm had settled into a steady breath, sighing against the cabin walls like something too tired to rage anymore. Inside, the fire cracked and spit soft sparks as Nolan leaned closer to the sleeping German shepherd. Ash had stopped shivering. His breaths were slow, but no longer shallow, rising and falling beneath the folded quilt. The frost had melted from his paws, revealing calluses and tiny scars, not from random hardship, but from training, repetition, expectation. Nolan narrowed his eyes. "He's not just any dog," he muttered. Owen glanced up from the window. "What do you mean?" Nolan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he ran a weathered hand along Ash's ribs, pressing gently along his spine. The dog twitched, but didn't wake. Nolan's fingers paused at the base of the neck where the fur was thick, matted, almost burned in places. "Here," he said, motioning Aurora over. "This shouldn't be this rough. Look at this texture. This isn't natural matting, it's friction, harness rub, long-term wear." Owen took a step closer. You think he wore gear? I know he did. With a surgeon's precision, Nolan pulled back the stiff fur with a damp cloth. As he did, something caught the firelight metal. "Hold the light," he said. Aurora grabbed the old lantern off the hook and brought it near. The flame flickered across the dog's skin, illuminating something wedged just beneath the coat line. Nolan tugged gently and unearthed a small square metal tag attached to a short rusted chain. He wiped the face of it with his sleeve, then froze. "What is it?" Owen asked. Nolan's voice dropped. "Military issue. Tactical K9 unit. Standard collar ID tag." He held it up to the firelight. The letters were stamped, not engraved. Practical. Unmistakable. K9 241. Unit Reyes. Aurora stared at it as if it might speak. Owen blinked. "Reyes. I've heard that name." "Then you've been in the right circles," Nolan said, his tone clipped. Unit Reyes was one of the off-books deployments. They were rumored to be used for blackout ops desert extractions, reconnaissance without trace. Only a handful of dogs made it through that program. He looked down at Ash, his expression unreadable. "And this one was left to die tied to a tree." Aurora's voice cut in, fragile but firm. "They threw him away." Owen crouched beside her. Maybe someone wanted to cover something up. Maybe he saw something. Or maybe, Nolan added, he simply outlived his usefulness. These dogs don't retire the way they should. They get reassigned, forgotten, or worse. Ash shifted under the blanket. His ear twitched. A soft sound, a muffled yelp, escaped his throat like a dream still clinging to pain. Aurora laid a hand over his paw. "I want to keep him," she said softly. "He needs someone." Owen looked at Nolan. Would he even survive? With her, I mean. In the real world? Nolan hesitated. He stared into the dog's face, grizzled, scarred, but intact. Then he shifted the tag between his fingers, as if weighing its worth. He's trained and loyal. That kind of bond doesn't disappear, even after they're dumped. But he's been broken. He glanced at Aurora. So has she. Maybe. Maybe that's why he followed her eyes in the snow. "You think he knew?" Owen asked. "No," Nolan said. "I think he felt." Silence settled in again, but it wasn't heavy. It was reverent. Then Nolan folded the tag, wrapped it in a cloth, and handed it to Aurora. "Keep it safe," he said. "It's his name, even if it's not the one you gave him." She nodded, cradling the tiny object like it was a lifeline. Owen crossed his arms. "You knew dogs like this?" Nolan smiled, barely. "One saved my life. Twice." He didn't elaborate. Instead, he stood, poured 3 cups of weak coffee, and returned to the chair closest to the stove. "You're not safe out there," he said, voice low. Whatever left him tied like that in that storm didn't just do it out of cruelty. That was intentional, cold, methodical. "You think someone wanted him to be found?" Owen asked. "No," Nolan replied, staring into the fire. "I think someone wanted him never to be found." Owen's gaze dropped to Ash. Aurora's hand never left the dog's paw. And somewhere, deep in the belly of the storm outside, the wind shifted, not cruel, but watchful, like it had seen something worth pausing for. The wind had softened into a lullaby, brushing faintly against the frosted windows of the cabin. Outside, The storm gathered its final breath and began to dissolve into the hush of falling snow. Inside, the fire glowed low and golden, casting dancing shadows on wooden walls, aging maps, and the three souls gathered quietly around it. Ash slept soundly now, wrapped in old wool blankets by the hearth, his breath slow and even. His ears occasionally twitched at some faraway echo only he could hear. His body, though bruised and underfed, no longer trembled. Aurora sat cross-legged beside him. Her hands rested on her lap, but her eyes never moved from the dog. There was a new stillness in her, less like silence born of trauma, more like reverence, a kind of listening only the broken know how to do. Nolan poured hot water into 3 chipped mugs, letting dried leaves steep. It wasn't quite tea, but it was warm and bitter, and that was enough. He handed one to Owen, kept one for himself, and set the last quietly on the floor near Aurora. She didn't flinch, she just nodded. A beat passed. Then Nolan finally spoke, voice gravelly but slow, like the opening of an old book. "I wasn't always out here, you know. Before the cabin, the mountains, the solitude, I wore a different kind of uniform." Owen looked over, interested but cautious. "Military?" Nolan nodded, eyes fixed on the fire. 22 years. Field medic. Then K-9 unit liaison. I knew how to stitch both men and dogs together when everything else was falling apart. Aurora's hand moved, resting lightly on Ash's shoulder. He stirred but didn't wake. "There was a dog once," Nolan continued, his tone threading memory with fatigue. "Name was Milo, Belgian Malinois. Smartest damn thing I'd ever met. He could detect a tripwire just by the change in bird song. Saved 5 of us in Afghanistan, then got reassigned after the base rotated out. I never saw him again." Owen's voice was quiet. "You looked for him?" "Of course," Nolan said. "But once these dogs leave official record, they become ghosts. Paper trails vanish. Units get dissolved. It's like they never existed." He reached into the side drawer near the hearth and pulled out a small metal box. Inside were a few old photos, yellowed, dog-eared edges curled by time. He held one up to the light. A younger Nolan in uniform, kneeling beside a lean, focused Malinois. The bond in the image was unmistakable. Not posed, not performative. It was survival made visible. Aurora shifted closer, her gaze still on Ash, but she was listening now, not just hearing. Nolan continued, tapping a finger on the photo. "I started seeing a pattern. Dogs like Milo weren't being rehomed. They were disappearing." He looked up, locking eyes with Owen. "And the name Reyes?" he said, more a test than a question. Owen's brows furrowed. "I've heard it. I think it came up in a task force report last year. Some kind of internal affairs mess. Officer died. Something swept under the rug." Nolan gave a tight nod. "Elena Reyes, police lieutenant, K-9 handler, based out of Juneau." Aurora blinked. For the first time, her eyes left Ash briefly to glance at Nolan. "She was killed 6 months ago," Nolan went on. "Official cause was listed as an accident. Car went off a cliff on a snow day, closed case, but rumor says otherwise." Owen leaned forward. "You think it was a hit?" "I think," Nolan said slowly, "that she got too close to something she wasn't supposed to see or protect." He looked down at the ID tag again, K9241, Unit Reyes, and then back at Ash. "If this dog was hers," he whispered, "he saw it happen. Maybe he tried to stop it." Maybe he was supposed to disappear with her, but someone hesitated. Someone tied him up instead. A heavy silence settled. Aurora's hand moved again, brushing the matted fur on Ash's neck. "She would have named him," she said quietly, like remembering something from a dream. "But now, he's Ash." Nolan looked at her, not with pity, but recognition. "Names matter," he said. "They're how we call someone back when they've gone too far into the dark." The fire cracked softly. Snow drifted down outside, thick and steady again. But inside the cabin, something invisible had shifted. Not just information, not just suspicion, but a thread of connection. 3 strangers, a war dog left to die, and the ghost of a woman who refused to be forgotten. Owen broke the silence. "So, what now?" Nolan sipped the bitter tea, eyes unreadable. "We keep him alive," he said. "We listen." "To what?" Owen asked. Nolan looked at Ash. "To what he remembers." The quiet inside the cabin fractured like thin glass under pressure. Ash stirred first. It wasn't a groggy shift or the slow waking of a recovering body. It was sudden sharp muscles tensing beneath the blankets like drawn wires. His ears snapped upright. A low growl vibrated deep in his chest, barely audible but unmistakable. The sound of memory, waking up. Aurora sat up instantly, her hand reaching to soothe him, but Nolan raised a hand to stop her. "Let him speak," the old vet said under his breath. The growl turned into a snarl. Ash leapt to his feet, staggering briefly but regaining balance with sheer instinct. His hackles bristled, head turned toward the door. Then the knock. 3 raps, heavy, assertive. Owen froze. Nolan rose without a word and moved to the window beside the door. He peeked through the curtain. His breath caught just for a second. "Sheriff," he muttered. "Doyle." The door opened a crack. Sheriff Doyle filled the doorway like a boulder tall, broad, and wrapped in a department-issued jacket dusted with fresh snow. His badge glinted under the lantern light. So did his eyes, sharp, calculating. "Evening, Doc," he said casually, though there was steel underneath. "Didn't think anyone would be out here this late." Nolan opened the door a little wider but didn't step aside. "Blizzard drove a couple travelers into the woods. Gave 'em a place to warm up." Owen stood behind Nolan, stiff as stone. Aurora didn't move. Ash stood between her and the door like a shadow cast in muscle and fur, silent now, but every inch of him alert. Doyle's gaze drifted past Nolan, scanning the room like a slow-moving spotlight. "You got a dog in there?" "Couple strays passed through," Nolan replied without hesitation. "They find warmth, then move on." Doyle's eyes landed on Ash. Locked. A flicker passed across his face, recognition or calculation. It was hard to tell. "That one," he said, pointing subtly with a gloved finger. "Looks trained. Not just any mutt, huh?" Nolan shrugged. "Not my dog. Didn't come with papers." Ash took one step forward, just one, his body still low, eyes locked on Doyle's. Then a flash. Teeth. Not a full lunge, not a wound meant to harm. But Ash darted forward, quick as a ghost through snow, and snapped just inches from the sheriff's outstretched hand. No blood. Just a warning. Precise. Controlled. But enough to knock the breath out of the room. "Jesus!" Doyle barked, pulling back, his other hand flinching toward his sidearm. "Easy," Nolan said, stepping between them. "You spooked him." "He's trained," Doyle said, glaring at Ash. "That's a bite hold. Law enforcement K-9s are the only ones conditioned to do that." Owen stepped forward now, his voice calm but clear. We found him tied up out there, half dead. No tags when we saw him." Nolan played the role perfectly weathered, annoyed but helpful. "Didn't figure it was your jurisdiction to ID abandoned dogs, Sheriff." Doyle didn't answer. His eyes were still locked on Ash, like he was trying to see beneath the fur-like he was peeling away layers of silence to expose something buried. "Name?" he asked finally. "No collar, no chip," Nolan said flatly. "If you've got a lost dog report, I'm happy to scan him. But I don't think this one belongs to anyone anymore." Ash held still, perfectly still, like a soldier waiting for command. Not aggressive, but not yielding. Watching, reading. Doyle glanced back at the snow-covered woods, then again at the firelight flickering behind Nolan. Something changed in his tone. A layer peeled back. "You know Reyes?" he asked. Quiet now, like he already knew the answer. Nolan didn't blink. "Lot of people come through these parts. Can't say the name rings a bell." Doyle smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Well, if this dog was law enforcement and he's in your cabin, that means someone's got questions to answer." He nodded once. "I'll check back." He stepped off the porch without another word, leaving boot prints that filled slowly with falling snow. Nolan closed the door slower than necessary, locked it, drew the curtain again. Silence stretched for long moments. Then Ash let out a breath and slumped to the floor again. Not asleep, just conserving. Owen ran a hand through his hair. He knew. Nolan nodded, but he doesn't know enough, yet. Aurora finally spoke. "He was trying to take him," she whispered, not asking, waiting for the right moment. Nolan looked at her, surprised by the clarity of her tone. "Sheriff Doyle was in the news," Owen added, voice low. "When Reyes died, he signed off on the accident report. I remember because it felt rehearsed." Nolan sat back down beside the fire, staring at the flames. "Then we better figure out what Ash remembers. Fast." Outside, the wind picked up again, soft, but colder than before, like something breathing just beyond the trees. The wind had shifted. Outside the cabin, the storm no longer howled. It whispered, low, ceaseless, like voices carried across a frozen lake, muffled by distance but never truly gone. Inside, the fire crackled, spitting sparks that glowed orange for a breath before dying in the dark. Owen sat with one knee bouncing, eyes flicking toward the door every time the timbers creaked. Aurora knelt beside Ash, stroking the fur behind his ears. The dog hadn't moved since the encounter with Doyle, but his breathing had grown steadier, measured, watchful. Nolan returned from the back room with a battered metal case. It bore a military seal, faded now. He set it on the table and opened it with a click. "What is that?" Owen asked. "Field-grade veterinary scanner," Nolan said. "Picked it up after I retired. Never trusted the cheap ones they started handing out in the cities." He pulled on a pair of glasses, their frames bent, lenses smudged with years of use. He reached for Ash slowly, giving the dog a chance to see his hands. Ash allowed it. The scanner beeped awake. Nolan ran it slowly along Ash's neck and shoulders, frowning in concentration. The device beeped once, then twice, then stopped. Nolan stared at the tiny screen, his brows furrowed, mouth tightening as he pressed a few buttons. "What's it say?" Aurora asked. Nolan didn't answer right away. He turned the scanner toward the light, scrolled back, then whispered under his breath. "Huh." He sat down, let out a breath like someone had opened a door to old ghosts. "Well," Owen pressed. "There's a chip," Nolan said finally. "But it's been encrypted. Full override. Not civilian. Not even standard police. This is something else." Ash lifted his head slightly, as if the words stirred something ancient inside him. Nolan rotated the scanner again, magnifying the last line of data. "Encrypted protocol, level 7, clearances sealed. Handler status, terminated." Aurora looked up sharply. "Terminated?" "It means his partner's dead," Nolan replied. "But that's not what concerns me. Look here." He pointed to a blinking code, a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to Owen or Aurora. But Nolan read it like a fossil hunter, brushing away ash to see bone. "This isn't just sealed, it's erased. There's a digital wipe signature embedded in the metadata." "Someone tried to delete him," Owen said slowly, putting the pieces together. Nolan nodded. "Dogs like Ash working dogs, K9, are logged into every department system. Records, training, missions. That data never vanishes." "Not unless someone makes it vanish." Ash stood now. Not fully, but enough to press against Aurora's knee. She reached for him instinctively, but her hands trembled. "It's like he was buried under ice," she murmured. "Not just left behind. Covered up." Nolan clicked off the scanner. The room felt colder now, despite the fire. "Back during my time," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we had units trained for specific cases: bomb detection, narcotics, search and rescue. Each one logged, each one traceable. But there were rumors about dogs trained off the books, used for things the law didn't want attached to a badge." "You think Ash was one of them?" Owen asked. "I don't know yet, but that tag K9241, Unit, Reyes, it meant something. And whatever Reyes was involved in, it wasn't clean." He stood and walked to the woodpile, loading more logs into the fire with practiced hands. The flames jumped higher for a moment, casting long shadows across the walls. Aurora leaned her forehead against Ash's. "He fought to get out," she whispered. "Out of the ice, out of whatever they buried him in. And he still trusts us." Owen watched them, then turned to Nolan. "So what now?" Nolan paused. His eyes, once tired, now burned with something sharper, something old and unfinished. "Now," he said, "now we find out who tried to erase this dog, and why they were so damn afraid of what he remembers." Ash didn't growl this time, but his eyes locked on Nolan's, and for the first time, the old vet felt like he wasn't looking into an animal. He was looking into a witness. The storm had calmed by morning. A heavy hush blanketed the woods, the kind that followed after something old had been disturbed. Inside the cabin, the fire had died to embers. Nolan stood by the window, staring out at the pale light bleeding through the snow-covered trees. His coffee had gone cold in his hand. Upstairs, Aurora moved carefully, her steps muffled beneath the old rafters. Nolan hadn't meant to leave her alone up there, but she'd insisted on looking for extra blankets. The attic door had creaked open like something exhaling from the past. She didn't mean to find it, but when her foot hit the uneven board near the back corner, the hollow thud told her everything. She knelt, pried it open with stiff fingers, and there it was, a footlocker scuffed with age, the paint almost gone from the lid. The brass plate read, "L.T. Elijah Avery, NYPD, K9 Unit, 1289. Her breath caught. The latch fought her at first, but with a grunt it gave way. The hinges cried open, and dust rose like memory. Inside, a folded flag, yellowed photographs, a sealed envelope marked "Do Not Discard," a journal bound in cracked leather, and beneath all of it, a stack of police reports and a photograph so sharp it seemed to hum in her hands. She carried it downstairs like it might fall apart if she blinked. Nolan turned when she entered the room. His face changed the moment he saw what she was holding. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, voice rough. "In the attic," she said gently. "It's Elijah's, isn't it?" He stared at the box. For a second he didn't speak, then, "I packed it away after the funeral. Couldn't bring myself to throw it out. Couldn't look at it either." Aurora placed the photo on the table between them. It was taken outside what looked like a city precinct. 4 officers stood in uniform. At the center, a man with tired eyes and a crooked grin, Nolan's son, Elijah. Next to him, one hand resting proudly on the harness of a familiar dog, Ash, no doubt, same build, same scar near the right ear, same steady, searching gaze. And next to Ash, a woman, name tag glinting, Reyes. Nolan sank into the nearest chair like the weight of it had finally found him. "I didn't know he worked with her," he murmured. "Reyes was just a name, in a briefing. No photo, no context." He picked up the journal, flipped through the pages. His son's handwriting sharp at the start, messier toward the end. Emotion clung to every line like fog to glass. Aurora sifted through the reports. Most were routine, incident logs, transfer papers, but one dated 6 months before Elijah's death stood out. Requested reassignment of K-9 241 pending investigation into internal misconduct within Special Ops Division. Request denied. Her voice dropped. They tried to move Ash. Nolan ran a hand down his face. And someone didn't want that to happen. They sat in silence for a moment. The cabin seemed smaller now, like the past had returned and refused to leave quietly. "I thought he died in a drug raid," Nolan said. "That's what the department told me, clean and quick, but this—" He gestured to the journal. "This tells a different story." Aurora flipped to the back page of the book. A single line written like a whisper. "If something happens, find the dog. He remembers everything." She looked at Ash, sleeping near the hearth. The firelight danced across his fur-gray, dark and speckled like the ash that had named him. Even in sleep his ears flicked at every shift in the wind. "He's more than evidence," she said softly. "He's proof," Nolan replied, "that someone wanted this whole thing buried." Ash stirred, blinking slowly, then fixed his gaze on the photo. It wasn't a glance, it was recognition. Like a wire pulled taut between memory and presence. "He knows," Nolan whispered. Aurora reached for the journal again, her fingers steady now. "Then it's time we remember, too." The wind had settled outside, but inside the cabin, tension curled in the corners like smoke. Ash lay still near the fire, his breathing shallow but steady. Nolan sat by the table, nursing black coffee that had long turned bitter, while Aurora thumbed through the journal again, piecing lines together like a fragile puzzle. Owen stood near the back window, one hand braced against the frame, the other curled tightly into a fist. He hadn't spoken much since they'd found the photo Ash, Reyes, and Elijah, side by side like echoes frozen in time. But now something was shifting behind his eyes, not just shock. Guilt. He finally spoke, his voice flat and low. "My brother was a cop." Nolan looked up. Aurora stopped flipping pages. He worked the same precinct, Southside Division. That's where Reyes was stationed. He never mentioned her by name. But I remember things. The way he'd come home late. The look on his face when the news said she'd died in a training accident. He didn't believe it. Not for a second. Owen turned from the window. The light caught the stubble along his jaw, the creases that had deepened since yesterday. 3 months before she died, he called me out of the blue. Said there were things happening at the precinct internal affairs wouldn't touch it. Officers going dark. Evidence lockers misfiled. Body cams erased. And a canine unit, this dog, he said it was smarter than half the team and twice as honest. Ash let out a small sound in his sleep, almost a whine. I asked if he was in danger, Owen continued. He laughed, said the danger wasn't coming for him. It was coming for her. Reyes. He took a breath, deeper this time, as if peeling back something he hadn't let air in years. 2 weeks later I got a call. My brother was dead. Official report said he crashed his car off route while responding to a domestic. Open and shut. Nolan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You don't believe that? I did, at first. I wanted to. It's easier to believe an accident than betrayal. Aurora said nothing. She saw the way Owen's jaw tensed, the guilt pressing into him like frost into old wood. But I started digging, he went on, and everything led to one man. He turned and met Nolan's gaze. Sheriff Doyle. The name landed like a stone. My brother said he was rising fast, promoted beyond his experience. Rumors said he had leverage on people, on systems. And Reyes, she was close to blowing something wide open. Something Doyle couldn't afford to let out. Aurora's voice was quiet. You think she was silenced? I think she got too close to whatever Doyle was hiding. And when Ash wouldn't comply with the narrative, they tried to erase him, too. Nolan sat back, rubbing a hand over his mouth. And Elijah? He wasn't even on that case. Owen's voice cracked just slightly. That's the thing. My brother said Elijah volunteered to help Reyes. Off the books. He was the only one she trusted. That's how he ended up in that photo. Aurora stared at the firelight flickering in Ash's fur. So the dog. He remembers all of it. Nolan whispered, That's why someone wanted him gone. The silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. I should have done something, Owen muttered. After my brother died, I shut down. Moved out here. I told myself the city broke him, that there was nothing left to save. Aurora stepped closer, her tone gentle but firm. You were grieving. That's not weakness. He looked at her then, really looked, and in his eyes was the wreckage of a man who'd watched the truth drown in silence. Now I have a second chance, he said, voice rough, and I'm not wasting it. Nolan stood. Then we finish what they started. He crossed to the table, opened the journal again, flipping to a page with faint markings. Elijah wrote something strange here. Find the dog. Find Reyes. The truth is buried where the signal dies. Aurora's brows furrowed. That sounds like a location. Owen nodded slowly. There's a dead zone about 5 miles east of here. Old radio tower's been down for years. Locals call it the Hollow. Cell signal dies there. So does everything else. Nolan looked at Ash. He came from there, didn't he? Owen met his gaze. Then that's where we go. The wood-paneled walls of the cabin creaked under the pressure of the wind, as if the old bones of the house sensed what was coming. The radio crackled in and out above the hearth, its static nearly drowning out the solemn voice behind it. "This is Emergency Weather Alert Unit 6 White Ridge County. A second system is approaching. Visibility expected to drop to 0. If you are in a rural area, do not attempt travel. Stay indoors, secure shelter. Estimated impact, 6 hours." Owen clicked the dial off, letting the quiet flood in like snow through a broken window. His jaw clenched. He crossed to the woodpile, grabbed another log, and fed the fire until it snapped with renewed fury. Ash stirred near the warmth, letting out a faint huff as the air shifted. "They say this one's worse than the last," Owen muttered. "If the power lines go, we're on our own." Nolan had already taken inventory blankets, canned food, spare batteries. He worked in silence, steady but methodical, like a man who'd lived through his fair share of long winters and longer regrets. Aurora sat cross-legged on the floor near the far window. She wasn't looking out, though. Her focus was downward, face tilted slightly as her pencil moved in quiet strokes over the paper in her lap. The light of the fire touched the side of her cheek, warm against the faint bruises of exhaustion beneath her eyes. Owen glanced over as he passed. "What are you working on?" She didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was soft, reverent almost. "A memory." She tilted the sketch pad toward him. It was unfinished, but the shapes were already clear. A tall woman, wrapped in a heavy winter coat, her eyes kind and strong. Standing beside her, drawn from memory alone, was Ash. His body lean, noble, the shadows under his eyes captured in cross-hatching that almost shimmered. Her mother's hand rested gently on Ash's head. "They never met," Aurora said, almost in a whisper. "But if they had, I think she would have trusted him, just like I do." Owen crouched beside her, studying the image. "He looks different," he murmured. She nodded. "He feels different, like he's still remembering who he is, but there's something solid in him now, like he chose to stay." Ash shifted, his ears flicking as if he heard his name through the quiet. "I used to think safety was a place," Aurora said, tapping the sketch gently. "But I think it's a feeling, and sometimes that feeling has 4 legs." A gust slammed into the cabin wall, rattling the windows in their frames. Owen rose to his feet, moving instinctively to check the bolts and braces. The cold was creeping in at the edges like an animal pacing at the door. "We're not going anywhere tonight," he said. "Best we bunker down and wait it out." Nolan re-entered with 2 extra kerosene lamps, setting them down with a grunt. "I'll board the side windows. Won't stop the cold, but it'll slow it down." Ash lifted his head, eyes following Nolan's every move. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just watched, quiet and alert like he understood they were all holding their breath for something unseen. Aurora tucked the sketch pad into her bag, fingers brushing over the worn edge. She looked to Owen. "Do you think the hollow will still be there? Whatever Reyes left behind?" Owen's gaze stayed fixed on the fire. "It has to be. Too many people buried the truth. She wouldn't have. Not if she died trying to protect it." Nolan's voice came from across the room. "Whatever's in that place, it cost my son his life. Cost Reyes hers. Cost Ash his name." He turned, eyes shadowed but firm. "Whatever it is, it's worth finishing." Outside, snow had begun to fall again. Soft at first, then thicker, heavier. The horizon disappeared behind sheets of white, swallowing the trees one by one. Inside, the cabin glowed. Not just from the fire, but from the feeling that maybe for the first time, none of them were alone in the storm. It began with a growl, low, uneasy. Ash stirred in the dark, body stiffening before sound even broke the silence. The cabin was quiet, save for the wind clawing softly against the shutters until his snarl deepened into something primal. A warning from a place that remembered danger far better than words ever could. Aurora blinked awake. The glow of the dying fire still flickered across the beams. Ash was already up, hackles raised, eyes locked on the back door. "Ash," she whispered. Then came the bark sharp, cutting through the room like a siren. Owen jolted upright from his place near the hearth. "What the hell?" Before the sentence could finish, the scent hit them. Smoke. Not the soft, woodsy kind curling from the fireplace, but thick, black, acrid, coating the back of the throat like oil. Aurora scrambled to the window and peeled the curtain aside. The barn behind the cabin was ablaze. It wasn't a small fire. Flames licked the night sky like angry fingers, orange against the snow-covered field, roaring louder than the wind. The structure groaned as timber popped and collapsed. Sparks flew upward like stars caught in reverse. "Jesus!" Owen was already pulling on his boots. "That's not an accident." Nolan stumbled into the room, rifle in one hand, coat half-buttoned. "It's the barn. Someone lit it from the far side." "You sure?" Owen asked. Nolan's voice was hard. "I smelled kerosene." Aurora stood frozen at the threshold, watching the fire dance with a kind of horror that didn't come from heat. It came from realization. "They're not trying to hurt us," she murmured. "Not yet." Owen turned to her. "What?" "They're sending a message." She looked down at Ash, whose body still trembled, tail stiff, nose high to the smoke-filled air. "They know he's here." Ash whined low in his throat, pawing at the door like he wanted to go outrun into the inferno and face whatever was behind it. As if some piece of him, old and broken, still thought it was his job to protect, even against the impossible. "No," Nolan snapped. "He doesn't leave the house." Owen moved fast, grabbing a coat and shouldering the emergency pack they'd kept by the door. "If the barn's gone, it means they're getting close." "If Doyle didn't know before, he sure as hell does now." "We need to move," Nolan said, already grabbing medical supplies. "There's a fire break at the creek. If it spreads to the trees, this whole ridge goes up." Ash growled again, this time toward the woods, not the barn. "There's someone still out there," Aurora said quietly. Owen didn't argue. "We'll take the lower path. Cover of snow. No headlights." They worked in silence, not panic, efficient. This wasn't the first time any of them had been forced to move with time clawing at their heels, but for Aurora, it was different. This wasn't a war zone. This was supposed to be a refuge, a quiet place where the worst had already passed. And now the flames had followed them in. She grabbed her sketch pad before leaving. It was instinct, not vanity. The last page was the drawing of her mother beside Ash. The edges were smudged, almost ghostly now. Ash brushed against her leg gently, his breath hot against the cold night creeping in through the open door. Outside, the fire roared louder, a language all its own. It didn't just destroy, it declared. "We see you. We remember. We're coming." They stepped into the cold, the snow swirling around their ankles like white mist. The barn groaned one final time before the roof collapsed inward with a violent crash. Sparks rose like angry embers. Ash paused beside Aurora, looked back once, and then walked forward into the dark. They didn't know what waited beyond the tree line. But they knew what they were leaving behind, not just a cabin, a warning wrapped in flame. They didn't wait for dawn. By the time the last embers of the barn collapsed into ash, Nolan had rigged an old wooden sled from the shed one with cracked runners and rope worn soft with age. Ash, still weak from the cold and trauma, was bundled in blankets and strapped down gently. His eyes were open, alert, but his body trembled with something deeper than chill. "Easy, boy," Owen murmured, brushing snow off his back. "We've got you." The wind had picked up again, like it always did before the blizzard turned cruel. Trees creaked around them as if warning them off, but they couldn't stop now. There was no cabin anymore, only a trail that dipped into the unknown. They set out under a sky the color of bruised slate. The snowfall was light at first, soft, drifting but deceptive. It thickened with every breath. By the time they reached the tree line, their tracks were already disappearing behind them. Nolan led with his flashlight low, one hand gripping the sled's rope, the other his rifle. Owen followed behind, eyes scanning the shadows. Aurora stayed in the middle half, guiding, half drifting, as if her feet remembered something older than maps. It was she who whispered, "Not that way," when Nolan veered toward the old logging road. He turned, squinting through the snow. "That trail leads down to the fire road. It's too open. They'll be waiting." "You sure?" She didn't answer, just pointed to a thinner path, a deer run, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Nolan hesitated. Then he nodded, adjusting his grip. "Then we follow you." And so they did. The snow swallowed sound, leaving only breath and footfall, the creak of rope, and Ash's faint whimper when the sled bumped over roots. They moved as one, silent, urgent. Aurora led them through switchbacks Nolan didn't remember, shortcuts between trees marked only by instinct. At one fork she paused, tilting her head. Then she did something unexpected. She hummed, a tune soft as snowfall, familiar, though the lyrics had long faded from memory. Her mother's lullaby, something she hadn't dared sing aloud in years. Even the storm seemed to hush around it. Owen looked up, startled. "Is that—" "She used to sing it when the power went out," Aurora said, voice flat. "When I was scared, she said it was older than storms." Ash gave a low sound, almost a sigh, and nuzzled deeper into the sled's warmth. Nolan watched the girl, watched the dog. Then he looked at the trees. Something about the way they moved like this wasn't escape. It was pilgrimage. They passed frozen creeks and trees bent under the weight of snow. Birds had long fled. No animal dared stir. The whole forest seemed to be holding its breath. Owen glanced back. No tracks behind us. Either they're not following, or they don't need to. "That fire wasn't meant to catch us," Nolan muttered. "It was meant to scatter us. But they underestimated the dog. And her." Aurora kept humming. Each note seemed to echo through the pines. It wasn't a song anymore, it was a map. The tower rose like a ghost above the treetops' wooden stilts, creaking with age, its silhouette barely visible through the thickening white. A relic from another time, half buried by snow and silence. Nolan spotted it first. "There," he said, voice raw with wind and urgency. "Ranger post. Used to be manned year-round before the cutbacks." It loomed above them, 20 feet of frozen stairs, iced over and uncertain. But it was shelter. It was higher ground. And right now, it was their only shot at surviving the night. "Help me with the sled," Owen said, already undoing the straps. They couldn't haul Ash up like this. Together, They lifted him, careful, slow, and climbed. Aurora went first, testing each step with the caution of someone who had learned not to trust what looks solid. Nolan followed, cradling Ash against his chest like a wounded child, the dog's breath shallow but steady. Owen brought up the rear, rifle slung and eyes watching the forest below. When the door creaked open, the smell hit them first. Dust, old oil, something metallic beneath. But it was dry. The floor was intact. A cot leaned against the wall, maps curled on the table. Long-forgotten coffee tins rusted on a shelf. No footprints, no signs of life in years. Safe for now. They set Ash down on a canvas mattress Nolan had cleared off. Blood had started to soak through the bandage on his side again, staining the fabric a muted brown. Nolan's hands didn't shake, but they moved slower than usual. "He reopened it during the sled ride," he muttered, unwrapping the layers with care. "Damn it. Tissue's thin. And whoever stitched him up before didn't mean for it to last." He dipped a cloth in the melted snow pot and wiped gently around the wound. Ash gave a soft, broken whine, but didn't resist. His eyes flicked toward Nolan, then closed again, trusting. Or resigned. Aurora knelt nearby, her fingers curling tightly in the wool blanket covering Ash's back. "Will he be okay?" Nolan didn't answer right away. "I've seen worse come back," he finally said. "But he's not just hurt. He's carrying something." "You mean memory?" she whispered. "I mean weight. Dogs like him don't forget. They don't move on like we do. They just hold it." Ash's body trembled faintly, not from cold, but from something deeper. Nolan pressed a hand gently to his flank. "Easy now," he said. "You're not alone anymore." Behind them, Owen powered on the old radio set mounted in the corner. The light flickered, then steadied with a weak hum. He adjusted the frequency with a practiced touch. "Station Echo 7, this is emergency channel. Do you copy? Repeat." Echo 7 requesting immediate evac or intel support. Coordinates: 45.962 north, 110.314 west. We have an injured K9. Possible law enforcement corruption. Respond. Silence. Then static. Then, "Say again." "Repeat last." The voice was garbled, male. Could have been Montana Dispatch. Could have been anyone. Owen stiffened. "Echo 7. Need confirmation of receiving party. Identify." Nothing. Just the slow hiss of snowfall carried over the speaker. He cut transmission. Nolan turned his head. "That might have been help." "Or it might have been Doyle," Owen replied. "That fire didn't scare him off. It told him where to look." Aurora moved to the window, brushing the fog from the glass. Below, the forest was a quilt of white and charcoal, branches clawing at the sky. No movement, but that meant little in a storm like this. "He's coming," she said quietly. "I don't know when, but he won't stop now." Nolan sighed, rolling his shoulders. "Then we keep moving once the dog's stable." "No," Aurora said. They looked at her. She stood taller than before. Still small, still bundled in layers too big, but there was steel in her voice now. "No more running. Ash didn't survive all this to keep hiding. He remembers Reyes. And I think I remember something too." She turned, lifting the notebook she'd been sketching in. A rough image of Ash, curled next to a man's boot. The man wore a badge. "My mom drew this once," she whispered. "Years ago. Said it was from a story. A true one." Owen stepped closer. "That's Reyes. And that's Ash before they buried his past." Outside, the wind howled louder. Inside, the silence deepened, like the breath before a storm breaks. The storm had quieted, like the world was holding its breath. Aurora stepped outside the tower before sunrise. Ash followed, limping but alert. Something had pulled them awake. They moved behind the tower, where snow thinned under pine trees. That's where Aurora saw it. A disturbed patch of earth, snow uneven, pine needles scattered like someone tried to hide something. Ash growled. She dropped to her knees, brushing snow away. Her fingers struck cloth, then bone, then a metal badge. Reyes M. Officer, K9 Unit. Faded, bent, but still whole. Ash stepped forward and let out a sound grief, not bark. He lay beside the grave and moaned low. "You knew," Aurora whispered. When Nolan and Owen arrived, she held the badge to her chest. Nolan's eyes widened. "He was your handler," he murmured. Aurora nodded. "And someone didn't want that known?" Ash didn't move. His vigil had begun. 6 months ago, Owen said. Reyes disappeared. Doyle filed the report. Nolan's voice dropped. "Because he helped put him here." Aurora stood. "We start with Reyes." In Ash's old collar, hidden in the lining, Nolan found a USB drive. "A micro drive," he said. "Who hides a USB in a dog collar?" Owen asked. Inside the ranger tower, Nolan plugged it in. A password prompt. "Try his badge number," Aurora said. It worked. A folder. Evidence 241. 6 videos. All within 2 weeks of Reyes's disappearance. The first, Reyes in his patrol car, lit by dashboard glow. "If you're seeing this, something went wrong." He showed files evidence of Doyle skimming narcotics, running ghost raids, laundering gear through a substation near Mill Creek. Then, warehouse footage, shadows, crates marked with federal seals. Reyes whispered, "That's him." Doyle, no badge, no uniform. Another clip played. Body cam. Reyes and Ash creeping through the dark. Gunfire. "Ash, go!" Screaming. A yelp. Then black. Nolan froze. Owen looked sick. "They left the dog to die." "No," Nolan said. "They tried to erase him." Ash stood now, eyes locked on the screen. A soft growl rumbled from his chest. "Why didn't anyone act?" Owen asked. "Because they never saw this," Nolan replied. "Whoever found Reyes buried him, hid the drive. You were the only one who got out," he told Ash. Ash sat, unmoving, but a vow burned in his stillness. "We take this to the feds," Nolan said. "They'll come first," Owen warned. "Then we make sure someone else gets out," Aurora said. "With this." Night pressed against the tower walls. The screen glowed with Reyes footage, files, faces, proof of betrayal. No one spoke. Not even Ash. "We have enough to burn half the department," Nolan said. "This goes public. Doyle goes down. But if we stay, we die," Owen said. Nolan didn't argue. "No rescues coming," Owen continued. "Doyle owns dispatch, the roads, the silence." "We can't broadcast from here," Nolan muttered. "Not from here," Owen said. "But I know someone." Elise Hartman, independent journalist, off-grid, lives past Ash Fork. You know her? She was my brother's last contact. Before he died. Aurora asked, Your brother worked with Reyes? Owen nodded. So we hiked 3 days through a blizzard with a kid, a wounded dog, and a flash drive full of death warrants? Nolan asked. One day, Owen said, to Black Hollow Ridge. There's a ranger station, ham radio. I can reach Hartman. If Doyle intercepts the signal, then we're already dead. Ash stood still but alert. Nolan looked out the window. Nothing. He's not lying, he whispered. Then we don't wait, Owen said. We go. Nolan grabbed supplies, flares, compass, rations. Owen spread out a map. We moved northeast. I know a pass under the snow line. Even with a kid and injured shepherd? She's not your average kid. Aurora met his gaze. He'll follow me. Ash didn't flinch, but leaned into her hand. We leave before dawn, Nolan said. He sealed the USB into his coat's lining. Time wasn't theirs anymore. It was borrowed. Ash stood by the door, watching, waiting. It began with a sound low, mechanical, swallowed by wind. Snowmobiles. Nolan froze. Move! He barked. They found us! Owen muttered a curse as engines roared behind them. Aurora clung to Ash's sled, silent but steady. They'll catch us, Owen warned. There's a cave near the creek, Nolan said quickly. Aurora, take Ash. Hide. Don't come out, no matter what. She nodded. No hesitation. While Nolan and Owen ran west to lead the pursuers, Aurora dragged Ash's sled through knee-deep snow, lungs burning. She found the cave half buried under a drift. Cold air breathed out like warning. Inside, she knelt beside Ash. His eyes met hers. He knew. Then, footsteps, crunching snow, a flashlight beam. Aurora held Ash close. Shh. But Ash wasn't resting anymore. The shadow entered. Ash lunged with a savage snarl. A scream tore through the cave. The flashlight hit the ground, spinning. A gun skidded out of reach. Stop! Aurora yelled. Ash paused for her. The man tried to rise. Ash snarled again. He stayed down. You were going to hurt us, Aurora said, voice trembling but firm. Engines roared past outside, missing the cave. Aurora curled in the dark, Ash wrapped around her like armor. And for the first time since her mother died, she felt safe in the presence of something with teeth. The Firewatch tower groaned in the wind. Inside, Nolan worked the console rewired batteries, cracked screen flickering. Owen watched the woods with a rifle. Aurora sat by the stove, drawing Ash larger than life, guarding her from faceless shadows. Nolan inserted the USB Reyes's last card. He bypassed encrypted channels and opened the emergency broadcast. Not to warn, to expose. Grainy footage rolled. Reyes, chest cam on, flashlight bobbing through a dark warehouse. Warehouse 9B. Officer Miguel Reyes reporting suspected off-the-record narcotics linked to Doyle's unit. In the corner, Ash, chained. Milo, Reyes whispered. His old name, then chaos, gunfire, blood, and a voice. Loose ends don't walk away, officer. Doyle. Nolan pushed the feed to public. Ranger towers lit up. Rural newsrooms picked it up. Hashtags began to spread. Hashtag justice for Reyes, who's Ash, /North Pine cover-up. What's happening? Aurora asked. We're telling the truth, Nolan said. Ash stirred. His tail thumped. He knew. Outside, the wind rose. But they weren't alone anymore. They had the signal. The world was listening. The shot rang out across the ridge. Then silence. Snow fell in spirals as Nolan slumped behind a boulder, bleeding. Owen's rifle still smoked. One of Doyle's men lay dead nearby. Too quiet. "Ash?" Aurora's voice cracked. She turned and saw him. Ash stood, chest heaving, blood darkening his flank, legs trembling. His eyes locked on hers. He staggered. "No, no, no." Aurora ran, catching him as he collapsed. "Ash!" she screamed, cradling him. His breath came in broken waves. His eye opened, closed. His tail thumped once, then stilled. "Ash, please." Her voice trembled. "Please don't leave me too." She rocked him in the snow, sobs breaking loose, raw, and endless. Nolan limped over, kneeling beside them, pressing his scarf to the wound. "We can't lose him," he whispered. Owen arrived, breathless. "We need to move. Now." "He can't walk," Nolan said. "She won't leave him." "Then we carry them both." Ash stirred, just enough to touch Aurora's leg with his paw. She felt it, her hand steadied. She leaned in, whispered the words her mother once sang. "You're here. I see you. I'll stay until you wake." Again and again. Ash's ear twitched. A breath. Still faint, but there. "He's still fighting," Owen whispered. And so would they, even if the mountain tried to bury them. The sirens had long faded, swallowed by the snow. Inside the emergency veterinary hospital, time crawled. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The scent of antiseptic barely masked the coppery tang of blood. Aurora sat curled in the corner of the waiting room, clutching Ash's collar. The metal tag still stained with blood pressed into her palm. She hadn't spoken since they arrived. Not when the team closed the doors. Not when they told her she couldn't follow. Across the room, Nolan sat flanked by federal agents. Owen leaned in, recounting what happened from the tower, the chase, the USB. Reyes's footage had ignited a political reckoning. Names, faces, Doyle among them. But justice was slow, and Ash was running out of time. A chime echoed. The emergency doors didn't open. Aurora whispered the inscription on the tag. Ash, K92147, if found, do not separate. Her voice cracked like dry leaves. Then footsteps. Nolan knelt beside her. They're freezing Doyle's accounts. The mayor's being pulled in. Aurora didn't answer. "He's strong, he's fighting." "He didn't move on the helicopter," she whispered. "He was conserving energy." A lie, but it was all Nolan had. Moments later, the vet tech stepped out. Mask off, eyes unreadable. "Ash made it through surgery. The bullet missed his lung. He's under observation." Aurora's breath hitched. "Can I see him?" "Just for a moment." She followed the tech down the hall. Nolan stayed back, eyes on the news coverage. None of it mattered if Ash didn't make it. 3 days passed. Ash hadn't moved. Machines beeped steadily. His chest rose and fell beneath clean bandages. Nurses came and went. One hummed lullabies. Aurora never left. She slept in a chair wrapped in Nolan's ranger jacket. Her hand always rested on Ash's collar, now worn like a bracelet. She hadn't spoken, not to agents, not to anyone, because if Ash wasn't safe, none of their words meant anything. Owen tried. Nolan tried, but Aurora stayed silent until the fourth morning. As the sun spilled gold through the blinds, Ash stirred, just a twitch. Then an eye cracked open, a dull glow, but alive. Then came the sound, a bark, soft, fragile, alive. Aurora leapt from her chair, palms against the glass. Ash's gaze found hers. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a scrap of pale yellow cloth, her mother's handkerchief, pressed it to the window, and spoke. "Stay." The word cracked open the silence. Owen froze. Nolan turned. "Stay," she said again, louder. "Please." Ash blinked. His tail moved. Aurora collapsed to her knees, sobbing, not from fear, but release. She had spoken. First time in months. Nolan crouched beside her. "You did it," he whispered. "He came back," she said, voice trembling. "You brought him back," Owen added. But it wasn't just the word. It was the word her mother used during storms, when the world felt like it might disappear. "Stay, I'm here." Now Aurora had passed it on, and Ash had heard. The auditorium was small, no red carpet, just folding chairs, dusty flags, and a podium that dwarfed Aurora. But to her, it felt like a cathedral. Ash lay at her feet, still bandaged, still slow, but breathing, watching, present. Commander Wallace Gray spoke at the podium. "This is not a farewell. It's recognition." Behind him, footage played. Ash in the field. Ash shielding Reyes. Ash wounded, crawling through mud but refusing to stop. "This dog," Gray said, "was marked unfit, disavowed. But we now know the truth." He turned toward Aurora. "She's why he made it back, and now he's why she speaks." The crowd, agents, officers, locals, watched in silence. Ash rested his chin on Aurora's shoe. A woman in uniform approached the podium with a silver medal. Then a new collar, etched with one word, "Guardian." "Ash is hereby reinstated," she said. "Not for combat, for a new mission." She knelt before Aurora. "Effective immediately, Officer Ash is reassigned to you, as your guardian, your family, your voice." Aurora stared at the collar in her hand. Then slowly she reached out. Ash lifted his head. She removed the old collar-frayed, still bearing ashes. She fastened the new one gently. The room stood. Some clapped. Others bowed their heads. Because this wasn't just about a dog. It was about what he uncovered, what he endured, and what he became, not despite his scars, but because of them. Ash rose, trembling, and leaned into her side. She whispered something soft. Only he could hear. Gray returned to the mic. "There's an old saying, some dogs are born to serve, others are forged." He paused. "But only a few are remembered." The snow was gone. Where once there had been silence and sirens through pine, now there was birdsong. The earth had softened, and in the meadow behind the old ranger station, Ash ran. His gait was uneven, one leg stiff from the bullet, but he didn't care. The German shepherd chased after a clumsy frisbee throw, barking with pride. Aurora laughed bright, unafraid. She had freckles now, sun-kissed like winter had finally let go of her. Behind them, Sanctuary 1 stood half-finished but proud. What used to be the ranger post was now something else. A beginning. Fresh wood, clean windows, no fences. Nolan stood by the porch in jeans and a soft gray shirt. The stitched logo read, "Canine Therapy and Reintegration, Sanctuary 1. He didn't talk much now. He didn't need to. Beside him, Owen adjusted a crooked beam on the new kennel wing. "Don't say it," he muttered. "I didn't," Nolan replied with a grin in his voice. Owen had traded spreadsheets for sawdust. The field echoed with barking, not fear, just joy. "He's getting faster," Owen said, watching Ash. "Yeah," Nolan answered. "He's healing." They both were. Inside the cabin, 2 retired canines watched from shaded beds. One blind, one anxious. Here, they didn't have to explain. No dog was broken, no story erased. "Ash! Over here!" Aurora called. The shepherd bounded toward her, skidding to a stop and collapsing beside her with a grunt. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. Then, from her pocket, she pulled a pale green ribbon woven by her own fingers and tied it to his collar. A small gesture, but it felt sacred. The kind of knowing you're not taught. From the porch, Nolan looked away. It was their moment. Owen brushed off sawdust. "You think this place'll work?" Nolan watched the girl and the dog how they no longer flinched from light. "It already is," he said. The statue stood outside the North Pine courthouse, bronze and quiet in the thawed morning. Officer Teresa Reyes stood beside a lifelike Ash, gaze forward, alert as ever. A plaque read, "For those who stood alone in truth, until the truth could stand with them." There was no ceremony, just a quiet unveiling. Owen stood, hands in pockets. Nolan beside him, suit wrinkled, tie askew. He hated suits, but for Reyes, for Ash, he wore it. Birdsong mingled with traffic. Across the square, Aurora sat on the courthouse steps, hair braided, green ribbon now around her wrist, like a promise. In her backpack, a worn photo her, Ash, Nolan blinking, Owen photobombing proof that joy returned. The school bell rang. She stood. A teacher at the door asked, "Ready?" Aurora nodded, and for the first time clearly, not softly, she said, "Yes." Inside, hallways buzzed with lockers, chatter, spring laughter. She didn't flinch. She passed the classroom, where she once sat in silence. Past the office where her name was whispered. Past the poster. "Speak kindness. Even softly, it matters." She found her desk still marked with tiny scratches, but this time she didn't need her hands. When the teacher asked who wanted to read, Aurora raised hers. Her voice, gravelly but steady, cut through the morning like light through stained glass. And in a nearby house, Ash lifted his head. He didn't bark. He just listened, like always. The meadow had gone wild with spring. Soft grass swayed among wildflowers around the headstone, yellow, violet, pale blue, like the ones Aurora once braided into her mother's hair. She walked slowly. Not from pain, from peace. Ash walked beside her, scars catching sunlight, eyes calm. He matched her steps. They stopped at the grave on the glen's edge. No gates, just trees like sentinels. Mara Quinn, loved deeply, gone too soon. You already know the words. Just breathe. Aurora knelt. The earth was soft. The wind smelled of blossoms and old rain. Ash lay beside her, head on her knee. She traced the engraved name. Then, like a page turning, she began to speak. All of it. The silence, the fear, the dog who wouldn't let her vanish. She told her mother about the snow, the tower, the collar hiding a USB drive, about Reyes, about buried truth unearthed. She spoke of Nolan's quiet, Owen's jokes, a town waking from sleep. Her voice cracked only once when she spoke of Ash collapsing, too still, too quiet. But she didn't break, because she remembered what came next. His bark, her word, stay. She looked at Ash, her hand in his fur. He didn't move. She turned back to the stone. "I know you can't answer," she whispered, "but I needed you to know." The wind curled around her words. "He saved me too," she said, "just like you did." She pressed her hand to the earth one last time, then stood. Ash rose beside her, and together they walked back through the wild grass, not as ones escaping a past, but carrying it. Lighter, taller, unafraid. In the quiet bond between a child and a dog, we find truths that words alone cannot teach. Through snowstorms, silence, and shadows, Ash was never just a German shepherd. He was a guardian, a mirror to grief, and ultimately a bridge back to healing. His loyalty, like that of so many animals we overlook or take for granted, reminds us that love doesn't always come wrapped in language. Sometimes it arrives on four legs, with eyes that understand pain without needing to explain it. This story isn't just about survival. It's about connection. It's a tribute to every retired K9, every shelter dog waiting for a second chance, and every person learning to trust again. It shows us that even in a broken system, truth can rise. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand up despite it. Most of all, it's a reminder. Animals aren't here to serve us. They're here to walk with us, to love us exactly as we are, and to teach us how to do the same for others. If this story moved you, let it be more than a moment. Let it be a reason to adopt, to protect, to love deeper, just like Ash did.